Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode. My name is Bianca Beck, and I am the marketing manager for the Middle East and Mauritius at the Sovereign Group. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Neal, commercial director for Africa, and Ratnah Tanakoor, business development manager, both based in Mauritius. Both Richard and Ratnah have been spending an increasing amount of time in Kenya, and today we'll be diving into growing business and investment ties between Mauritius and Kenya, two very dynamic markets in Africa with increasingly shared interests. We'll be discussing recent trips to Kenya and investor appetite and why being on the ground has been increasingly important for the Mauritius team in building meaningful relationships and understanding the local business landscape. I think, guys, to start us off, can you tell me a little bit more about your recent trips to Kenya and, what the main focus has been for the two of you?
I'll start off. I was most recently in Kenya. So I was in Kenya from the 19th of May to the 23rd of May, 2025. And it's actually the second trip I've done to Kenya in the last 6 months. I can't get enough of the place. Very friendly people and a substantial amount of business to be done there. My latest trip was spurred along by three primary reasons. First of all is to reconnect with the clients and the intermediaries that Ratnah and I met with in November, as well as getting to see some of those we weren't able to see in our last trip. So that was extremely fruitful. Second was to attend the GTR East Africa conference. So that really is focused on export, trade, and supply chains in Africa, particularly in East Africa, mainly looking at the financial side of that business, of all those three businesses. And then the primary reason for me going there was actually to conduct a series of networking events. We had 3 days. Within 3 days, we had 8 networking events, which were running breakfasts, lunches, and afternoon drinks. So extremely fruitful. We had within 3 days, we had 8 of these networking events. The average amount of attendees was 15, which actually seemed to be the sweet spot. It was small enough to have one-on-one conversations with each, and a lot of attendee collaboration was the outcome.
And Ratnah, I know that you've been over to Kenya for some business trips. So what was your experience with the market there?
The first business trip was last November. It was very important for us to re-engage with the Kenyan market, as we have been doing pre-COVID. As we observe the African nations, we keep on seeing Nairobi popping up as one of the leading African nations. So visiting Kenya again and maintaining the relationship with industry leaders has been vital. And now we can see the engagement between Mauritius and Kenya becoming more enriching.
What is some of the challenges for a trust and corporate service provider company like Sovereign? How are you finding gaining traction and entering a new market, the Kenyan market?
Yeah, so I think Kenya is an extremely interesting market for us. Kenyans, by and large, are extremely business savvy and keen to collaborate. But that doesn't mean that it's without challenges. The challenges that we've encountered, or at least the two key ones, is first of all skepticism to outsiders, particularly in the financial service industry. We're finding that it's really the most important thing is to develop trust and build on relationships. One cannot accept or expect to go into Kenya, once or twice and come home with business. It's very much a developmental market where you need to meet and meet again and grow the relationships and trust with them. And that's very much an African concept. It's not something where you can trip in and trip out and win business. It's a long-term play, and we're lucky enough to be getting some traction and getting some sales from it. But one cannot expect to be winning business from the first trip. And then the second challenge is really it's more for the wealth paradigm. That's particularly in Kenya. The wealth paradigm is different to what we've experienced in other markets. Kenya, wealth is predominantly measured in land and in property, rather than financial assets. So if you come across a wealthy family or a successful entrepreneur, they tend to view investments as land and property rather than financial assets. And us coming in there and talking about trusts and companies and developing wealth outside of Kenya is quite a big ask. But that said, we are seeing a changing understanding about wealth, particularly with the newer business classes coming up as the older guard, leave business. The young ones are a lot more comfortable with financial assets, and particularly with keeping those assets offshore and growing them in a place like Mauritius.
Ratnah, have you experienced any challenges, or is there any other like speed bumps, let's say, that you've seen when it comes to winning business in Kenya?
To start with, at the very macro level, Mauritius and Kenya, we have not enforced the double taxation avoidance agreement yet. So at the very start, when you look at the both economies, it can be to a disadvantage. However, our presence on the local market and visits to Kenya is a way to show that we are proactively engaging with that market so that we develop a good relationship with these industry leaders, our existing clients and future collaborators, so that we don't have to depend really on wait for the double taxation avoidance agreement to be in place before starting to do the business. So we are developing that market, and it's encouraging, in fact, to see more engagement, good responses so far.
Okay, and what are some of the shared opportunities you've identified between these two nations? Do you believe that it can lead, well, I mean, you've kind of indicated that you think it will, but collaboration, investment, do you think despite these challenges that the market is interested?
Absolutely. We are seeing more and more conversations, interest from our Kenyan collaborators to discuss about Mauritius in terms of the banking infrastructure. So Mauritius can in fact be a very good solution when it comes to cross-border financing that could help businesses from Nairobi, from Kenya in general, to relocate through Mauritius to facilitate their expansion across Africa. So the banking infrastructure is one of our key players when it comes to proposing Mauritius as a solution. We also see offshore structuring solutions to big corporates from Kenya who want to utilize Mauritius as a proper platform to do their businesses from China, from Asia, across Africa. So this engagement is developing into a true collaboration, which we do find very fruitful.
Richard, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think Kenya and Mauritius have got a lot in common, and there's a lot of collaboration that has happened and can continue to happen. But just in terms of a mindset, Kenya is very much a cross-border country. They are well experienced in cross-border transaction, primarily because of their location. Kenya is known as the gateway to East Africa. Mauritius calls itself the gateway to Africa. So they both have got this welcoming towards trade. Kenya being the kind of the port country for many of its neighboring nations, has already got in their mindset that, there's trade not only into Kenya, but trade from Kenya into the rest of the East African market and beyond. So there's a lot of synergy to be had there. And the mindset of collaboration, trading cross-border is certainly there, and something that Mauritius can take advantage of and support.
Okay, so they've really created themselves as a bit of a base for the countries around them. From an investor's perspective, what stood out to you about, Kenyan business and how they do business? Are there any sectors or trends that Mauritius should really be paying close attention to?
Interestingly, yes, because Kenya shows the diversified economy from manufacturing, cross-border activities in terms of exports. But what really stood out was the financial services sector and legal services that they do provide. It has been very impressive to see the amount of good contents, good initiatives that legal firms, tax advisory firms, and financial services sector are willing to collaborate with Mauritius. So in terms of the business landscape, this provides a lot of hope for future collaboration and to develop the market further. How about you, Richard? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, so what piqued my interest, particularly on the last trip, was, investment is really ripe for fintech. So I think, the rest of the world looking at providing fintech solutions and developing them in Africa. Kenya is certainly a great hotbed for that, to grow that. And also homegrown fintech. Kenyans are extremely happy to adopt technology. They're adopters of technology. If you look at a product called M-Pesa, which is a payment online mobile payment system, 77% of the population are active users of that. So fintech is certainly a space that investors could look to going into Kenya, and likewise Kenya to the rest of Africa. On my last trip, I met with a client of ours who's young entrepreneur, and he's got a fintech company that provides insurance to the lower LSMs via a mobile app. It's using technology to lower the entry barrier entry. And interestingly, he said that he's got a dozen friends and contacts within the industry that are actively using technology to go into industries like finance and disrupt the traditional way of doing things and really bringing financial services to the wider market.
Okay. And then it sounds like based on that, you're kind of already explaining why it's important for the Mauritius team to travel to Kenya in person. But how do you find that, being on the ground and having these face-to-face meetings is adding value to your understanding and kind of relationship building around the Kenyan market?
Well, for one thing, going to Kenya is invigorating. It's they're, for one thing, extremely welcoming. They love collaboration, very willing to help, and also very willing to share ideas. So I think what we're getting out of it, actually going there in person, is actually to understand the market better rather than, purporting to have all the answers, rather listen and understand the constraints, because they're very willing to explain where the pain points are, where the opportunities are, and then collaborate together going forward, rather than, forcing them to listen through to presentations and assuming that we have all the answers. So being in front of them, listening and understanding the market better has been invaluable for us.
Yeah, and that eye to eye thing, just you really can't beat it, can you? Ratnah, what is your experience?
The Kenyan hospitality is something that is the warmth for us to do business with Kenyans. Being on the ground, meeting with people, discussing about fruitful collaborations and future partnerships makes the whole difference.
Yeah, I think in particular markets as well, Africa and the Middle East kind of being the same, it's really important to build that rapport and build those relationships, because especially in a world where business is done more and more online, when you show up physically somewhere, you're truly showing your commitment to a partnership, to a collaboration. Yeah, some really interesting thoughts, guys. I think we will leave it there. Thank you both so much for joining me today. It has been really great to hear from both of you the importance of Mauritius, building meaningful and long-term connections in Kenya. And I'm sure through the consistent engagement and consistent visits that you guys are making your mission, that you're bound to get a deeper understanding of the dynamics in the region. And it sounds like there's a lot of exciting potential for collaboration between the markets. You mentioned, Richard, fintech opportunities and cross-border structuring. So thank you so much both for your insights, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thanks, Bianca.
Great.